Thanks, Squire.
Thank you, Squire. Could you hear more? Tim Singers, I have your minutes here.
I can hear you.
We live inside paradox. Humans generally don't like to admit it. We much prefer tidy, stable, comprehensible, logical ways of getting through the day. But paradox is woven into the fabric of this particular universe we inhabit.
Light is both a particle and a wave. Imaginary numbers describe the math of physical phenomena. Love and grief are inextricably linked, as are rage and sorrow, suffering and compassion, life and death.
Time itself is both linear and cyclical. Each person's life traces a single arc, yet patterns emerge and re-emerge. Fear always seems to return. Goodness knows terror finds its way back into the news. We always seem in need of help to roll back the big stones that block our way.
Yet we also come back to Alleluia, even if its absence has gone on far longer than the 40 days of Lent. We raise each other's spirits when our sacred places seem empty. We anoint each other.
We engage in a demanding faith that asks us to love the next world into being today. We are joyful though we have considered all the facts. We practice resurrection.
It is Easter again, my friends, and you are surrounded by a multitude who wish you well. Come on, let's sing. I invite you to rise and bow to your spirit.
Good morning and happy Easter, and welcome to the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge. I'm Reverend Eric Poza, one of your ministers, along with so many others who are making this Easter Sunday worship service happen. It is so good to see you all. Good to have you joining us online as well. We do have a few things coming up that we want to announce, and the first one's coming up today, right after the conclusion of this worship service. We are going to be having in our middle hour between the two services both an Easter egg hunt and a party outside in our courtyard and breezeway. Those of you who are with us in the sanctuary, we invite and encourage you to stay for that. Those who are watching online, you are welcome, if you are within driving distance, of coming on down and joining us for that. It'll be good to see you either way. We do also have two other things coming up to note. One is that a week from today, on April 24th, we will be having our annual congregational meeting. in between the two services, starting shortly after the first service ends. That will be here in the sanctuary, but also with opportunity to join online. And we'll have a few things we'll be voting on, so we encourage you to check emails for more information. Some have already been sent out. And something that's coming up next month, but sign up starts for it today, the Holy Grill. This is an activity of the Interfaith Federation of Baton Rouge, which the various religious communities who are part of it take turns serving meals, serving lunches at a park in North Baton Rouge for the community there. And we are taking our turn in mid-May, but again, the sign-up starts today. So please find the congregational care table outside, and the sign-up sheet will be available there. We hope several of you will join us for that, and we are glad that you've all joined us today.
And also, before we get too deep in and forget to thank them, so Kelly Smith, Tony, Jennifer Casson, and Dan Casson are our guest musicians today. Thank you. So we've made it to another Easter. We were trying to find the theme for today's service, and I was trying to guess where all of you might be. I was contrasting it with that first scary shutdown Easter and last year's Easter. Now that we've shifted from the pandemic being an acute trauma to more of a chronic problem, it fundamentally shifts the way we do Easter. Because of the chronic situation we're living in and how it feels, at least to me, that there's a tenuous excitement in reopening. I thought maybe we should call this service the Rebirth of Rebirth. We've had rebirth before, but this year it feels a little different to me. Now, I wanted to make sure that we hadn't already covered this last year, so at our worship meeting a few weeks ago, I asked the staff what we did last year. None of us could remember. There were 5 of us, 0 remembrance of what we did last year. Now, it's not uncommon for a worship staff to forget what's preached, like once it's done, it's sort of packed away. But to have 0 remembrance speaks to how, we actually pulled it up on the website and looked and said, oh, that was the theme. But it speaks to how exhausting and all-encompassing this pandemic is. So we had called last year the Resurrection of Hope. We didn't know when we preached that it would be at the time period where basically we entered in the longest period of safety that we have had. Tools like the vaccine entered into the frame. So we preached on hope coming back. But today, you're going to hear reflections from me, Eric, and Kathy on the theme of rebirth. We're going to invite you to explore how you can find rebirth. I'm thinking especially of those who right now might not be feeling the rebirth of hope or even just of rebirth. How do we uncover your fresh springs of hope and love amidst all the heartbreak that is going on around us? That is going to be what we explore today.
We do share with one another in so many ways. Let us take a moment shortly for a symbolic sharing of what we bring with us into this time of worship. Our sharing of stones, be it in person or virtually. A couple of things to note first. We do have one member who's just had surgery, Charles Williams. We bid him a speedy recovery. And of course, several of us were here yesterday for the memorial service for Webb Haymaker. We do want to add one stone new condolence to Nancy Seidner on the death on Friday of her daughter, Susan McCaffrey. But for those who have others that are on your heart, other people, other concerns, other blessings and celebrations. We invite you in the sanctuary to come forward along each wall, forward to take a stone and place it in the basin of our chalice. Those who are at home, we invite you to type into the chat. Some type an asterisk for their stone, others will symbolize, or will name rather, who they are remembering. So we invite you now, please come forward and share. And we light the flame in our chalice, our symbol of our freely covenanted Unitarian Universalist faith, saying together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love. Lo, the earth awakes again. It's such a common Easter hymn, a very widely used Easter hymn among Unitarian Universalists. And that's pretty understandable. It speaks to a kind of rebirth that frankly is palatable to those of us who deny that a human being can be resurrected. The thoughts instead of leaves returning to trees, of azalea bushes blooming, wildflowers popping up along roadsides, these are the rebirths that work for so many of us. And I'll confess that I used to have a strong opinion about this hymn, but I find it now has changed as we're emerging from the particularly acute phases of the pandemic. Now, it's not that I dislike the song, it's fun to sing. Though the fact that it's a rewrite of a Christian hymn, Jesus Christ is risen today, does strike me as, well, would cop-out be too strong of a word? Yeah, probably would be. But even that would be fine if it was used as a hymn for spring, as it so clearly sounds to me. But singing these new lyrics about the earth for Easter worship, that always felt like a mismatch. Why? Because as I said in last year's Easter service, I see a difference between the meaning of rebirth in spring and the meaning of rebirth for Easter. The idea of rebirth in spring is the cyclical that we spoke of before, the return over and over of that which we have come to know does return over and over. Whereas the Easter story is the story of unexpected return. Because even though the stories in Christian scripture and the Gospels speak of Jesus telling the disciples that he was coming back, nobody really believed it as the story is told. And yet it happened. Again, as the story is told, it was the huge surprise, what Howard Thurman has called the glad surprise, the unexpected return of that which we had every reason to think was gone forever. So the reason I used to prefer Easter hymns that didn't speak of spring, of flowers, of longer days, is because that kind of unique resurrection, the unique rebirth, differs from the eternal return of spring. But that was before the pandemic. And now that we are emerging, sort of, from it, well, I'm finding that both of them have meaning together. I spoke at the Tenebrae service earlier this week about how we needed time to grieve that which we have lost during this time, and how we need to acknowledge that not everything will return. There are, yes, people we sadly have lost, and also there are changes that have occurred that are not going to go back to the way they were. And we don't yet know all of what those are. But that said, I'll add also now that we need to celebrate as well. Celebrate what is returning, both what we would expect to return, including who we would expect to return to the church, to aspects of our lives that they've been missing from largely for 2 years, and that which may surprise us, that which we are sure we've lost and yet will be coming back to our utter amazement, perhaps. So this year, I'm finding the Easter message and the spring message go together even better than usual. So it felt particularly good a few minutes ago to sing Lo, the Earth Awakes again. And later in this service, I'll offer some possibilities for what these rebirths might entail here, particularly at UCBR. First, I invite us to join together again in song, Morning Has Broken.
Like the first So, we often talk about how leaves and flowers burst into being in the spring. I went looking online a little bit and found from poets as diverse as D.H. Lawrence, this spring as it bursts forth in bonfires green, or Ogden Nash. Listen, buds, it's May 21st. Don't you know enough to burst? There's cheesy greeting cards, let your joy burst forth like flowers in the spring. Broadway musicals like Rodgers and Hammerstein's June is bustin' all over the meadow and the hill. Buds are bustin' out of bushes. So we hear that description everywhere. I think we hear it so often we don't even think about it anymore. And a recent post I was reading pointed out this bursting into being part, it only looks like it's a sudden thing. And really it's not. It's life energy that's been stored up for weeks or months or even decades. Like in my native Nevadan mountains, there's a tree called the lodgepole pine. It drops its cones year after year, but they are closed tight and sealed with resin, and they need fire and then rain in order to begin to open and make those tiny pine seedlings. This life energy, it builds up in the roots and the branches and in the little nascent shoots of leaves and buds that are invisible to the human eye for so long that we imagine that they're not there. And then one day, when the conditions are right, they appear. And we think it's a miraculous rebirth, when really what it is that the energy has built up enough, the air and the ground are warm enough, the soil is wet enough for buds and blossoms to be the next step. And human beings are a lot like that too. And human communities are a lot like that. So in this time when we are coming back together, sometimes tentatively and sometimes in what seems to be these great glorious bursts of energy, let us remember that this blossoming is an expression of the life energy that's built, that has stored up, that has been building up in us, in our connections with each other, in our community, in this church. And it is those gardens where we have been tending that energy that are most likely to bud into leaves and flowers and new branches. And it is the people who are in that garden, nurturing that life energy, who will see those growth spurts and who will shape the landscape that the garden will become, which is a really, really long way of saying rebirth is not a sudden miracle that comes from nowhere. It never is. It is the channeling of life energy that has been hidden or dormant or slow like sap in the cold, becoming visible and vibrant once again and blossoming into the things that we can see with our human eyes.
Well, again, we share with one another in so many ways as we worship together, and we have opportunity now to make a tangible expression of our sharing as we receive the morning's offering for the continued good works of this congregation, yes, but also as we do now every week, sharing with another organization in the community, doing good works in harmony with our Unitarian Universalist values. And for every Sunday in the month of April, we have been sharing with the Louisiana Environmental Action Network, LEAN. That continues today. And in fact, I believe we have a video, yes? Just tell you a little bit more about LEAN.
Hi, my name is Mary Lee Orr. I'm Executive Director of Louisiana Environmental Action Network. For over 36 years, LEAN has been working to improve the health, safety, and quality of life of Louisiana communities. We want to thank the Unitarian Church for their support of our mission, for making Louisiana a better place to live. Thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. I appreciate you very, very much.
And with those words, the offering is now joyfully given and gratefully received.
It's confirmation of existence, and I appreciate that. So I entered seminary a few years after I was a religious educator. Through a series of weird job moves, I was not working as an educator at the time when I entered. But one of my colleagues, she was a religious educator at the same time I was. She was in Fort Worth and then moved to Austin to take my job. I mean, I was leaving, and so I convinced them to hire her. But we entered seminary at the same time, and I was really excited, like we were going to go do the good work together. And about a year in, she converted to conservative Judaism. And I was not upset because of the conservative Judaism. I was upset because now I wasn't going to get to see her at all the stuff. But I asked her why. And she said that Unitarians are just not humble enough for her. And that they tend to think of themselves as God. I don't know why. I still remember where I was standing when she told me that. I lived in a lofted efficiency, and I was standing next to the laundry closet when she told me over the phone, but it's embedded in my brain. I didn't like what she said because it rang a little too true. 6 years ago at General Assembly, worship leaders rewrote the lyrics to one of the modern gospel hymns. In one of the lines, it says that it is His will that every need be supplied. Now, I understand rewriting the words to degender God. I find that God is too complicated a construct to try to fit into a simple binary or even a multiple gendered system. But they didn't change it to degender God. They changed the phrase, it is His will, to it is our will that every need be supplied. God is now not only us, but we are in control of every good thing that is going to happen. Actually, everything good or bad. And that's just too much. Also, it's a little too much into the prosperity. I do want to name also, I like doing it when it's mine, because it's not me calling out families. No one is in practice being in church together, and so it's going to take time to get used to it. Also, I can confirm the quantity of food versus non-food consumed today is probably quite low. So I just want to name it. So it's going to take us probably 5 years to get practiced at it. All right? Anyway, so it's a little too much of the prosperity gospel, because the problem is if you need God to keep you alive, God will fail every single human being at one point. If we are the agents of good and bad happening, then we're going to fail at some point. So this is where I kind of get into trouble with one of our modern theologians, James Luther Adams. He wrote a piece in the mid-20th century called The 5 Smooth Stones of Religious Liberalism. He used that idea of David slaying Goliath, and he said that religious liberals, not political liberals. Religious liberals are the other end of the spectrum of a religious fundamentalist. So religious liberals have 5 requirements to be liberal. We must believe that revelation is ongoing, that truth is still being revealed. We must work towards justice. We must come to church of our own free will and not through coercion. Good things don't just happen, we make them happen. And the 5th is, to be a religious liberal, you must have hope. So I think one of his 5 smooth stones is faulty. It's the 4th one that says that goodness doesn't just happen, we must make it happen. And I think right there is where Unitarian Universalists get it wrong. More often than not, the rebirth of hope happens whether we make it happen or not. The Gospel of Mark ends without a conclusion. The women enter the tomb and he's not there. It ends with saying they were afraid and they told no one. That's it. A few hundred years later, religious leaders hated that ending so much they tacked on another chapter. I'm serious, go to any reputable Bible, and once you get past the afraid and told no one, look at the footnote, and there says the earliest copies of this manuscript do not have this in there. Unitarian Universalists love to manufacture hope. We see it as our job to make ourselves the center of fixing climate change and racial injustice and all the injustices of the world. And paradoxically and hypocritically, it is true that if we don't do it, it won't get done. But it is also true, it will get done whether we do it or not. So today, I'll encourage us to look for the rebirth after the rebirth. I'm not sure where you find hope when it seems lost. But we must all be doing the religious work of finding it. That is our work our collective work as a religious people. But also to trust that it is there.
I invite us to come together in a moment of prayer. Spirit of life and of love, God known by so many names, mystery beyond all of our naming. On this day when we celebrate what is reborn among us, and what is reborn beyond us, help us to find the joy and connect with that which we can and do celebrate. Help us to remember how renewing and strengthening those moments of joy and celebration are. And however the energy emerges in our lives and the world around us, be it an eternal return or a glad surprise, help us to know that we are both needed and never by ourselves sufficient, but always to achieve the greater change, but always sufficient to be who we are and to be present with others, connecting with others, to bring a more beloved community, ever more reborn, into our midst. So may it be for us all. Amen. I was remarking to some of our staff a few weeks ago and have had opportunity to share it with a couple of you in one-on-one conversations that it was just a few weeks ago, one of the later Sundays in March, that it finally felt here on a Sunday morning at this church, not exactly like the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge that I knew 20 years ago when I did my internship here, but what I would have expected this church to have become 20 years later had it not been for the pandemic. I gotta tell you, it was a great feeling. The combination of familiarity and insight into what had changed after having been with you for so long during this interim ministry has been an incredible blessing for me and incredibly renewing of what has been both for so many decades and continuing today in new ways so good about this congregation. And yes, it's true what I said a few nights ago on Tenebrae, that we have lost some things. Sadly, we've lost some people to this pandemic and in other ways. And taking time to mourn those as we did on Thursday night is so important. And so is celebrating what's returning, what's being reborn. Now, I want to name just a couple of things in particular. It is especially wonderful to hear the rebirth of something that I know a few of you are occasionally disconcerted by, which is the sprouting of voices, even in this sanctuary during worship, from those of us who are smaller and younger than me. I am so glad to be hearing that vibrancy returning, and I have so much hope for this congregation about what it means for your future long term. And I want to note something that is returning in a different way, and that you may be worried about the fact that you've not been seeing today. I understand it's been your tradition for some years to participate on Easter Sunday in the flower ceremony, which is a practice developed almost 100 years ago by Unitarians in what was then the nation of Czechoslovakia, Prague, led by their minister, Reverend Norbert Čapek, whose words we just heard in the hymn we just sung. But I so appreciated it when I heard Reverend Nathan say recently that flower ceremony is important enough to us that it deserves its own day. I couldn't agree more, and I'll frankly add that we learned over the years that the intent of the flower ceremony was so different that Čapek's widow, Maya Čapek, objected to congregations celebrating it on Easter. Loved seeing congregations celebrate it, but not on Easter. Said that changed the message too much, because the flower ceremony is about celebrating the individuals coming together to make the community. And it's not about rebirth as so much as it is about what is continuing. So rest assured, we may not be doing the flower ceremony today, but we are doing it. 2 weeks from today, in fact, coincidentally, on May Day. So rest assured, it's coming. And those of you who will be present with us in the sanctuary 2 weeks from today, please bring a flower. And those of you who will be joining us online 2 weeks from today, we'll talk about how to participate in the flower ceremony in that way as well. But far more importantly than anything else, I know that there are people here who have been frustrated at moments by what has felt like an ongoing transition, an ongoing time of transition in this congregation. And that's both true and not true. You have had an extended period of time since your now minister emeritus announced his retirement to this coming summer, when your next Minister of Congregational Life, Reverend Chris Long, will begin his service amongst you, and congratulations to you, and particularly to the search committee for that match. As an interim minister, this is what I'm here for, to help support the congregation through this time of transition until that new ministry can begin. And it feels like work well done, though it also feels like it would have happened whether or not I was here. But with Reverend Long's arrival are going to come so many pieces of renewal, rebirth, some expected, some unexpected, and frankly, some things that are brand new amongst you. They're all going to be worth celebrating. A few of them may throw you off for a few moments. That's natural. Change has that response amongst us. But this is a good change. And so even though it feels like an extended transition, though the time from your Minister Emeritus is retiring to the start of your new senior minister's new position was exactly the same amount of time as it traditionally is in Unitarian Universalist churches, exactly 2 years to the day. I understand it's felt longer, but you're nearing the end now. We're wrapping up the details, and it's good to be re-emerging in this time. I look forward to seeing just how much will be reborn amongst you as we move forward.
So a little bit of a cheat sheet for you all. This next reading, if you are deep in the belly of Unitarian Universalism, you have already read this. There is a thing you can sign up for called Brave or Wiser. You can do it right now on the internet. It's a curated every Wednesday reflection from often Unitarian Universalists and sometimes others. And this is from one of our colleagues, Reverend Molly Housh-Gordon, in the Midwest somewhere. I think it's Kansas City. Do you know? It's
somewhere
Missouri.
That isn't Louisiana.
Not here. So anyway, and we know the choir's here. This is by design.
The women were there to the very end. They watched as his body was taken down and wrapped in linen and placed in a tomb.
I imagine them wailing, keening, or perhaps their limbs felt as heavy as their hearts. Perhaps you too have experienced that spectrum from raging to frozen grief. The earliest telling of the story ends in bewilderment for the women of the story and for their reader alike.
Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
Could Jesus really rise again?
Could it really be that the violence of empire and the pain of loss would be denied the final word?
In that ancient retelling, we don't get an answer. There is no resolution. There is no certainty. There is only a seed of complicated hope and the persistence of human love to help it grow.
What strikes me about the ancient text is that it was not only Jesus who rose up that morning, it was also the women who loved him, who rose up from the pit of their grief to tend to him.
It was also the movement that his teaching sparked, a community who rose up to spread his message of power in weakness and victory in love.
Is new life possible? Is love stronger even than death? The question itself invites us to rise up and to live as though it were true, to make it true in our living.
The lesson for the women, for the forces of empire, for us is this. You can crush love down, bury it, cover it, but it will rise. It will reach for the sun and it will reach for each other.
Love will have the final word, even if that word is just a question, a wild possibility, a whisper to rise and follow wherever it may lead. Communities formed and nurtured in love will rise up for and with each other again and again.
If we've learned nothing else these years, it is this. Even when everything is uncertain, even when we are grieving, even when the loss keeps coming, even when we are forced apart, even when we are bone weary, we keep reaching for one another. We keep rising in love. As your minister, I cannot manufacture hope for you. That is your work, but I have faith that it will happen. The groundwork has been laid, the roots are there. The structures are in place, and it's not just the things you expect to be reborn. I can tell you that I see hope. I can tell you that I see hope in the fact that we are gathered, and that even with some of the worst that I could have ever imagined, and I'm not just talking about this stupid pandemic, I'm talking about all of the violence and hurricanes and economic insecurity and the fact that our legislature is still targeting trans children. I could see among all of that there's a reason we should give up and not rise up. But I've seen trying over and over to make this world better, to be together. I've seen you be with each other. In other words, I cannot manufacture your rebirth. I cannot manufacture your hope, but I can tell you that it is there. I can tell you that all of my lived experience and all of what I've studied in theology says that you are not outside of love, and that hope and justice will come. Maybe not in our lifetime, but it will get there. And until it does, I will be here with you. This church will be here with you. I hope that you will be here for each other and that you will be here for the rest of the world that desperately needs you. So for those of you who are struggling right now, please reach out. Please know that it is simply a gift that you are alive and you are with us. Please know that miracles surround all of us. If the last few years have taught me nothing else, it's that human connection and love for each other cannot be destroyed. No matter how terrible the status quo is or the empire tries to make it, justice will always find a way through. Love will always find a way through, just as grass cannot be stopped by concrete. It always finds a crack. So too will you find love and justice, and we will all experience rebirth. Amen. Let's sing. Go out and enjoy this day. Go out and enjoy this week and this gift that we've been given. Go make the world better because someone knows you. Amen. Go in peace.